All the remaining 23 abducted Abuja-Kaduna train passengers have been released by terrorists 6 months after they were kidnapped on March 28, 2022. A 7-man presidential committee assembled by the Chief of Defense Staff, General Lucky Irabor, facilitated their release. In a statement signed by the Secretary of the Chief of Defense Staff Action Committee, Professor Usman Yusuf, he noted that all sister security agencies at the Federal Ministry of Transportation contributed immensely to the success of the operation. Reacting to the news, President Muhammadu Buhari said that the entire nation owed the military and other sister security agencies a debt of gratitude for walking the talk as he basked in the euphoria of the safe return of the remaining 23 kidnapped Abuja-Kaduna train passengers held in captivity by Boko Haram terrorists since March 28. In a release by his spokesperson, Malam Garba Shehu, Buhari said that agencies are showing outstanding capabilities over the period that the whole world will not fail to take note of. He urged them to sustain the momentum. Yesterday marked the end of an ordeal that plagued the nation since March 28th. On that day, 300 people set out on a rail journey from Abuja to Kaduna. However, the train was intercepted and attacked by terrorists, leading the Nigerian Railway Corporation to suspend that route. Sadiya Mantu recalls the saga.
Months since the attack on the Kaduna-bound train from Abuja. On that fateful March 28th, 62 passengers were abducted. Although none of the victims died in captivity, 8 were killed during the attack on the train. Several victims were released periodically throughout the ordeal after their families paid ransoms, often up to 100 million naira per hostage to the terrorists that kept their loved ones captive. The first captives released included the MD of the Bank of Agriculture on April 6th, a pregnant woman on May 15th, 11 hostages on June 11th, 7 others on July 10th, 5 on August 2nd, and 4 more on August 19th. Negotiations were fraught with controversy, and on September 6th, terrorist negotiator Tukur Mamu was arrested in Cairo, Egypt, en route to Saudi Arabia, after a raid on his office and residence by men of the Department of State Services. He is accused of being party to an international terrorist network under the guise of journalism. This decision by DSS was condemned by popular Kaduna-based Islamic cleric Sheikh Gumi, who questions why Mamu has not been charged to court. It is believed that the negotiations became fractious when the terrorists allegedly reneged on a proposed swap agreement with the federal government, as they forcefully freed their fellow jihadists from the Kuje prison on July 6th. The remaining 23 train victims were finally released after terse negotiations with the federal government. The victims, their families, the government, and the nation at large are relieved that an end to this national horror has come, as the government and security agencies continue to ramp up humanitarian operations and rid the country of the terrorists bedeviling it. Sadiya Mantu, Arise News.
Right, a lot to talk about, Dr. Bati, about the end of this ordeal.
Well, first, yes, I think it's perfectly in order for President Muhammadu Buhari to congratulate the armed forces and the other security agencies who were involved in this operation. 23 remaining persons have been released. On March 28, when the incident occurred originally, we were told that a total of about 362 passengers were on board that train. But now, at one point or the other, many figures have been given. But first, congratulations to the armed forces and to the government for ensuring that the last batch of persons have been released. Now, the persons were freed in batches, 11 in June, 7 in July, 12 others in August, and now 23. And, some families had to pay ransom. Some were released on compassionate grounds, and now we've been told that the remaining batch has been released, which will seem to provide some kind of closure to that unfortunate incident of March 28. In the course of the attack on that Kaduna-Abuja bound train, 8 persons were killed. Some persons were also declared missing. So Why this is something to be celebrated, I think that certain questions will also still need to be raised. And what are those questions? These persons who have now been freed finally, and there you have on the screen, the number of persons who were freed, either persons who paid ransom or those who were released on compassionate grounds. One question would be, were these persons released or were they rescued? There are details that we do not know. Maybe the security agencies will say, there were negotiations, because we heard that at the time, the kidnappers were making demands on the federal government, including the release of persons, who have been arrested over time. So even if it was through negotiations, no matter how complex those negotiations may be, there's some form of closure. For persons who have been freed, maybe not for the families of the 8 that died in that attack because of the finality of death. 2, another question to ask is, what is the situation with the terrorists, the kidnappers, the bandits? Nobody has given us details in that regard. Were they arrested? Or, the federal government is also thanking them for releasing the persons that they rescued. And that's why I said the negotiations may have been complex. And hence, we have the right to also know the details. Did they just release the people and the federal government say, oh, thank you very much. You can go in peace. We are happy that we have rescued the persons. The third leg of it is what is reported in the papers, the reference to Tuko, the publisher of the Desert Herald. We're being told that this success has been achieved because the Department of State Services took the step of arresting Tuko. What is the connection? How? What lessons can we learn? Because what we know is that Tuko, the publisher of the Desert Herald, was said to have been helping the government to get persons released. And there were times when, through his efforts, we were told that, he was interfacing. Okay, did something go wrong somewhere? I think the public would like to know. The fourth point that needs to be made, and that is not a question, it's an affirmative statement, is as follows. That now that these 23 persons have been rescued, the important thing is the statement made by the president that the effort will be sustained. Sustaining the effort will mean simply that nobody, no citizen, should ever be subjected to this kind of horror. 191 days of horror for families and victims in a country where the Constitution guarantees you the right to the dignity of a human person. For you to be denied your freedom unjustly, illegally, unlawfully, is first and foremost a violation of your fundamental human rights, an abbreviation of your rights as a citizen. We are hoping that the victims that have been released, that the federal government of Nigeria will take further steps in this regard. 1, to provide both the victims and their families counseling services. 2, to ensure that should there be any one of these persons who have been released, who may have picked up any ailment, that the federal government also helps to ensure that those persons are treated. We're told that those persons have been taken to hospital, yes, but they also have to be monitored. And number 3 is to see how quality intelligence can be gathered from all the persons who have been released so that the institutions, the relevant institutions, can deepen their knowledge. Finally, I think it's just to repeat the point that it is good, and proper that the federal government of Nigeria, through the president, has congratulated the armed forces, led by the Chief of Defense Staff, General Lucky Irabor, on this achievement. But, that praise will be more fulsome, will be more deserving if every effort is made to ensure that this kind of situation does not arise again, and that every Nigerian, be it a Nigerian on top of a bicycle or a motorcycle or in a train or in an aircraft, can move about this territory called Nigeria without any hindrance, without any harassment. And there are even foreigners that are in Nigeria under the principle of the responsibility to protect, R2P, that the government will ensure that everyone, is very safe around here.
I mean, very well said, Dr. Abati. Congratulations once again, to the people released. Congratulations to the military. Kudos to them. We celebrate our very, very valiant, successful troops this morning. Thank you so much for all you do in defense of the country and in service. Thank you to the Nigerian military. Thank you to the Nigerian government. But should we have even gone through this ordeal in the first place? Should we, as a people, have gone through this? Probably, just only if that security architecture that was supposed to be put on the train track, that the transport minister requested for, if it was put on that train track, are we going to go through all of this? Did we manage this properly? Didn't we remember the litany of lies at first, where we were told that, people were evacuated, nobody was kidnapped? Didn't we remember how we mocked that doctor, that only our offense was to come on social media and say, I've been shot, pray for me, and people said she's lying, that you were shot, how can you still tweet? Before we finally heard she died. Did we treat the family members that went to protest at the transport ministry well, when only their offense was to ask for the release of their loved ones? I hope we have truly learned from all of this. So today, as we take all the commendation, let's also take in the lessons. We didn't manage this well. The government didn't manage this well. But there's been some level of redemption with these people finally being released. And let's not forget that some people paid hefty ransom. The other argument they'll make is that Tuko Mamu was arrested. They could probably cite some correlation. But I'm happy and excited at least all of this has come to an end. Going forward, it will behove on them to make people trust that transport system again. Because I know the next thing will be movements about reopening the transport system, maybe this year or next year. Secondly, the psychosocial support as stated by Dr. Abati. How far-reaching is it? And how can you build trust in a group of people that you let down when they needed you the most? We all know how they were pushed out, the families of these victims, when they went to protest at the transport ministry. I hope they are able to get over the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder. Because as we all know, like the First Lady did say, post-traumatic stress disorder does linger for a lifetime. And even the president she enunciated has had his own fair share of PTSD. I pray for the quick recovery of these people from PTSD. But as a nation, we should never, ever forget. And most importantly, we should say never again should people be attacked for taking public trains. Moving on. The Federal Executive Council has held a final review of the 2023 budget proposal. Details of the appropriation bill or alterations were not revealed as a traditional briefing after the weekly hybrid meeting did not hold. Special Advisor to the President on Media and Publicity, Femi Adesina, says President Muhammadu Buhari will present the final copy to the joint session of the National Assembly on Friday.
It was virtually a one-item Federal Executive Council meeting in which the budget proposals for 2023 was presented and discussed at length. That budget proposal will be taken to the National Assembly on Friday morning by Mr. President. So it will not be proper to begin to discuss the content of what will be officially presented on Friday. You have the revised 2023-2025 fiscal framework. You have expenditure profile. You have budget proposal. You have aggregate expenditure, overhead costs, personnel costs, capital expenditure, and so on and so forth. So all those things have been discussed.
Okay, Dr. Abati, I mean, your take on this.
Okay, a budget of about 19.76 trillion in terms of expenditure have been proposed. But the big issue with the 2023 budget is the quantum of deficit, over 12 trillion. Now, when the Minister of Finance and Budget Planning presented the medium-term framework for that budget, she painted a number of scenarios and pointed out, how we face a difficult situation in 2023. Some of the things she said was that, look, if you have the subsidy regime still in place, then the government will have to borrow. In fact, we'll have to borrow more money than the expenditure of all the 36 states. If you remove subsidy, this is the reality that you will have. And then, of course, all of those scenarios presented before the National Assembly. Of course, a budget deficit of over 7 trillion is unthinkable. The unthinkability of it was indicated by the Minister of Finance and Budget Planning when she pointed out that we stand the risk of the Nigerian state not being able to engage in any capital expenditure in the year 2023. In the face of all of this is the major global recession that has been predicted. Only yesterday or so, the World Bank, revised the economic outlook for Nigeria downwards to about 3.2%, single digit, and it's just 3.2%. So Nigerians may well be expecting, greater difficulty next year, depending on the kind of choice that is made. I know every year, we come around with, budget of creativity, budget of consolidation. The more ambitious characterization of budget, the governor of Cross River State, takes the credit for that. But at the federal level, you find the federal government still giving those labels. So will the budget of 2023 be a budget of borrowing? Well, I don't want to jump the gun. They're going through the process. The president, we're told, will present the proposals on 2023, and it's called a proposal because the National Assembly will still have to adopt it because it has to be made into a law. That's why we talk about appropriation bill. So as we've often said, the devil is in the details. Let us see the model, that has been adopted by the National Assembly. Let us see the quantum of the deficit. This same National Assembly had said ahead that, look, government will have to cut fat, leakages and wastages. They were even talking about the Onosaye report, as a way of rescuing Nigeria. But we can only know when we see those proposals and we begin to debate those proposals. The third point to be made in this regard is that consistently the Buhari administration has tried to, restore the budget cycle and ensure that the budget is presented, early enough so that the fiscal calendar is not disrupted. So if the president presents his proposals on Friday, we expect that again, they will start on a clean slate by next year. But the major challenge of implementing that budget will be the responsibility, of course, of the next administration, since this is the last budget proposal that will be laid before the National Assembly. That is the phrase, that is used by President Muhammadu Buhari. So we look forward to that Friday before both the economists and the laymen begin to ask for, the analysis of the details. But the future really looks really tight with all the headwinds that we have in this economy.
I mean, very well said, Dr. Abati. But one thing I've always had with our budgets is the big question, how realistic are they? Look at what we make as a country. The projected revenue probably for this year was a little over 5 trillion. Then we take in a lot of deficit. And the deficit creates problems because we need to pay back. And we start to kick the can down the road. And when you look at the capital expenditure, it's stifled because we have another monster in the room called recurrent. So the way our budget plays out, at the end of every year, a lot of corruption happens, duplication of contracts happens, and in the end, we can't even fulfill the requirements in the budget. Maybe we do about 60% in the budget. When you look at it, no real development, and we've taken debts. So what we should do is, and kudos to this government, at least for even getting one thing right, for making the budget cycle better, so we know the budget comes out on time. But what we should do is we need to rejig our budget and be honest about our expectations. Taking a deficit of 12 trillion, probably a sizable part of that will be to pay subsidy. Does that really make common sense? Where we can truly spend on the things that affect us, schools, healthcare, those things that bring about social support in society. And that's why we need to have a rethink of our budget itself. And let's not, allow it to be another padding episode like we remember. Because we all know how it goes on, that when this is sent to the National Assembly, then you start to see all sorts of very funny, fictitious projects being padded in the budget, and the cycle goes on. Our budget is supposed to help us stand tall as a nation. But our budget every year is always a conduit pipe of corruption. We need to think anew about our budgeting in this country.